Hello, my name is Dan and I'm a flight instructor for a company called FTA Global based in the south of the United Kingdom. As a flight school, we train you to become a commercial pilot, which would then involve you working for an airline or another company being paid to fly. During this STEM talk, I'll explain in detail everything you need to know about training to become a commercial pilot, as well as a bit of a background about myself and my course of training. As an outline of this STEM talk, I'll start with talking about myself, following on to why would you become a pilot, how the flight training course works, including the different routes that are available to complete your training, and what you can do to prepare for pilot training, including some of the skills that we would recommend you develop before you start on a course. We'll then talk about what we would expect from our students and conclude with a video. So starting with myself, as I said at the beginning, I'm a flight instructor. The clue's kind of in the title there, but my main job is to teach people to physically fly a small aircraft leading up towards those larger jets that you might expect that a pilot would fly. The term flight instructor is broken down into two separate parts, and we call that practical and theoretical training. The practical training would be where you're taught to actually physically fly an aircraft, how it works and some of the physics behind it. And then accompanying all the practical flying lessons that we do, there are theoretical elements, things like knowledge of the weather, aviation law, and again, more maths and physics to further develop your understanding. Something that's become quite large and very recent now with pilot training is what's known as pilot competencies. So one of the jobs of a flight instructor is now to develop you as a person as well as the skill of being able to fly an aircraft. And we'll talk more about these pilot competencies a little bit later in the talk. So to give you a bit of an idea as to what it is that I do on a day-to-day, I've included a couple of videos that I'd like to show you. So the first one is a video of myself and another student completing what we would call a circuit flight. And this happens quite early in your course of flight training. This effectively is teaching you how to actually land and take off an aircraft by yourself.
It is alive and increasing.
Consider room, you're taking off 30. But just make sure your feet aren't on the brakes there, free. That's it, good. Good team. Don't let it rotate early, that's just a fraction early. That's it. So if we come up early, just lower that nose, let it accelerate ground effect, that's it, and then we can climb away. So that's it. So keep pointing at those numbers, keep it coming down towards the numbers. That's it, a little bit more to the right. That's it, more to the right. And that speed as well, good. So that's it. Close power. Raise the nose to the end of the runway. Good. That's it. Very nice.
Okay. Sub, plan full power.
Now that particular video might make things look quite easy. I'm really just sitting there and just talking a little bit to the student about what they need to do. But fundamentally, I'm sitting there not really doing too much. It isn't always quite that easy, but it can be a little bit more fun. So one of the things that we have to contend with a lot when we're teaching people to fly are the weather conditions and how that can affect how the plane flies. Something that all pilots have to be taught to deal with is what's known as a crosswind landing technique. This effectively means that pilots need to be able to skillfully and safely position the aircraft to fly straight down a runway regardless of what the wind is doing. So this next video shows myself with another student in a slightly different aircraft completing these crosswind landings. Now the wind was quite variable on today's date, and that means it was increasing and decreasing in strength quite quickly. See if you can see the moment that I had to take over from the student. Do you think you spotted it? We've always got to be prepared as flight instructors to take over from the student, not because they're doing anything wrong, but perhaps a situation is developing. And again, that's one of the fundamental skills that you'll need to be taught as a pilot, and that comes with practice. So a bit more information about myself, my background. Believe it or not, my interest in flying actually came from a video game, from a flight simulator that I purchased at a car boot sale. A very unconventional way to get into flying. No family background of flying at all, so it's all completely new to us. I just found that after I purchased this game, I got quite addicted to it. I found it really interesting, especially the physics of how it was working, and ended up booking myself in for an introductory flying lesson. This is probably the best way for you to work out if flying is something you would like to do as a career. Your local airport will normally have a flight school that will offer these trial lessons or these introductory flights, and they're a really great way of getting your first hour experience and seeing if this is something that you would like to do. I completed my flight training along what's called the modular route, and that's quite an important term. That's something that we'll come to shortly. Importantly, my training was self-funded. The perception of flight training is that it's a very expensive course, and it is, and it's something we shall talk about, but you don't need to have hundreds of thousands of pounds available to you, and self-funding is perfectly suitable for this modular option. In terms of my background qualifications, I didn't go to university, so I studied A-levels, none of which you can see here are particularly apt for flight training. They're quite varied. And I'm currently working into what we would term a corporate environment. So not quite the airlines, but maybe a little bit more kind of private jet for those clients that can afford it. So enough about me. Why should you become a pilot? Well, there's many different roles, not just an airline pilot that you might expect. You could fly for a cargo company. You could fly in the corporate sector, like I'm aiming towards. You could be a ferry pilot. It's someone that moves aircraft around the world for people that have purchased them, or possibly even a flight instructor like I'm doing at the moment. There's lots of different ways you can go about building your experience as a commercial pilot, and it's great to start by looking at the airlines as your career path, but remember there's a lot more different roles out there than just working for an airline. The views and experiences are unquestionably some of the best that you can see. The wonder of flight has always been something that we've been really interested in, and it's no surprise when you do get up to your first 1,000 feet or so and you just see a completely different perspective of the world. I've seen some amazing sunsets in other countries, experiences things like moving very small light little aircraft from Spain and over the mountains, all these things that you could never imagine you'd experience, but you can get. Absolutely fantastic. Now, for those of you that like to be challenged, this is obviously a very challenging job to do. It does come with its difficulties, but if you're one of those people that's very proactive and you like to overcome these challenges, this is a perfect role for you. It's very stimulating. It really does keep your brain engaged. You're constantly thinking, what is happening at the moment, but also what will happen next. And skill development, again, many skills, most of which we will look at, you'll constantly be developing as you go through your training and as your career. Generally, it's quicker training compared to some other jobs. A lot of people compare flight training and training in the medical profession, and they do have some similarities. To become a pilot will normally take you around about 2 years on a full-time course. Some professions, like medical qualifications, can take quite a bit more, sort of 4 to 6 years, so it's relatively quick. And the industry, as I think is being proved at the moment, is particularly resilient. The aviation industry has experienced many events in the past. The pandemic is quite a sizable event at the moment, but as its past does prove, people do generally always want to fly. People want to go on holiday and see their friends and travel, which is a good thing for us and for those future pilots. Lastly, something I'd like to mention as well. Again, a bit of a misconception, but a degree generally is not required for you to work as a commercial or an airline pilot. It used to be, it was quite a big thing, but since the courses have developed, and again there's a lot more emphasis now on the skills that you learn during your training, or these competencies we talk about, most flight training schools and airlines won't require any university degree from you. It's certainly beneficial to have had one, but it's not a requirement. So, once you've decided this is something that perhaps you would like to do, how do you go about doing it? So there's a couple of terms here. I'll try not to get too complicated, but we need to start by thinking about what qualification you're actually working towards, and this is referred to as your pilot license. The license itself is one of 3 different kinds. You can obtain what's called a private pilot's license, or a PPL, a commercial pilot's license, or a CPL, or an airline transportation pilot's license, an ATPL. Now you'll see I've put the last 2 in blue there. That's to represent that those are the 2 that you would need to work as a commercial or an airline pilot as a minimum. So if you were obtaining something like a private pilot's license, that would entitle you to fly quite light little single engine aircraft most of the time. You wouldn't be paid to do this, so it would be for recreation. You may be taking your friends and family up for a local flight. With a commercial pilot's license, you would be able to be paid for the flying that you do on certain kinds of aircraft, and that would include things perhaps like some small little jets or some turboprop aircraft, that sort of thing. The final license you get is the Airline Transportation Pilot's License, and of course that's the one that you'd be needing if you were looking to work as a captain for an airline. You would, however, only require the commercial pilot's license to get your first job as a first officer and then work your way up towards being a captain. Now, the flight school FTA, we teach you to obtain your commercial pilot's license, as that's the highest license that you can get at the end of your flight training. Your airline transportation pilot's license only becomes available after you've built up some experience in the industry. Once you have your physical license, though, there are certain additional things that you require on the license to be able to exercise it fully. A good comparison would be thinking of a driving license. If you wanted to drive something like a truck or a car or a motorbike, the license itself may exist, but you would need those individual qualifications on the license to allow you to use these different parts of it. And this is what we term a rating. So again, I've put these three in blue here, as they signify the minimum that you would require to work as an airline pilot. And some of the ones that you would expect and we would train you for would be a night rating, which allows you to fly an aircraft in the dark, as you might expect. A multi-engine piston rating, or an MEP, to allow you to fly a multi-engine aircraft. And probably one of the most important parts of your flight training, and one of the most difficult, is for the instrument rating, or the IR. This in itself allows you to fly when you cannot have reference to the ground. And that sounds a bit unusual. What does that mean? That means, as pilots, in your very early days of flight training, you will be able to see the ground and see ahead of you without obstruction. So you can always see where you are, but more importantly, you can see where the ground is and how to avoid it. With the instrument rating, you are taught to fly without reference to the ground and using only the aircraft's internal instruments. Now, there's quite a lot of illusions and disorientations that we experience as humans, and these are things that are taught to you as part of your training. So the instrument rating is critical for any aircraft that's intending on operating in cloud or when you can't see the ground, which of course would be an airline. Those are some individual ratings you do as part of your training. Once you've completed those three ratings and have your commercial pilot's license, you're ready to go out to an airline, to send off your CVs, or to go and look for some corporate commercial work. The final part of your ratings that you would put onto your license are referred to as type ratings. So certain aircraft, because they're so big and complex, require their own individual training courses. So you may have a commercial pilot's license with an instrument rating at the end of your training, but to go and fly something like a Boeing or an Airbus jet, you would need to do some additional training, generally with that airline that has then offered you the job, and that would be referred to as a type rating. Lastly, if you're looking at some additional options, further ratings are available to you as part of your training. Things like instructor ratings, like I have, so you can teach other people, and maybe you'd like to do something a bit more fun, like an aerobatic rating. So that's the license, that's the rating. How do you then go about completing your training? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are different ways to complete it, different courses. The first option that's available is termed modular, and this is the route I completed. This in essence means that you complete each phase of the flight training course by course. So you would start by obtaining your private pilot's license, step one, start to build up some experience on that, maybe add on a night rating at one point, the instrument rating a little bit further down the line, and in essence you're slowly working your way up the ladder to achieve your commercial license. Modular courses are particularly suited to those people who prefer to complete their flight training over a more extended or flexible basis. These are particularly good courses for people who would still like to work in their career whilst they're training, or perhaps are completing something like a degree alongside. You can complete all or some parts of your training with FTA. The best thing you could do would be to inquire individually for your needs. The other course that's available to you is known as Integrated. This is effectively the full-time course that gets you from never flying an aircraft at all to being able to apply to an airline. These generally take around about 2 years, and when you enrol, you're as part of a class with a group of students, and you complete all of your training back to back. So it's the quickest way to obtain your license. Bit of a breakdown sort of shows here an idea on the time that's required with the individual courses. You'll notice that the modular course, which is the bars that we have at the top there, are broken down into the private license, the night rating, some theoretical examinations you have to take, and then followed by those more complex and advanced ratings and tests. That same standard of training is in exactly the same with the integrated course, but it's just compressed and restructured slightly. But the license you obtain at the end and your qualifications and ratings are exactly the same. So what can you do to prepare then, if this is something you would like to do? Well, I can't stress this point enough. It's critical that you take the time to research which option would be better for you, and that would also include visiting as many different flight schools as you can. We all teach on different aircraft in different environments at different airports, all have different benefits and drawbacks, and only you can find out which would work better for yourself. Qualifications. Now, I said you don't need a degree to start flight training, and that's certainly true with us. We do require you to have at least 5 GCSEs that include a maths, an English and a science at a grade 4 result or higher. It would be preferable to us if you had at least 2 A-levels or an equivalent, but again, it is not a requirement for you to start the course. You do need to be at least 18 years or over to commence your commercial flight training. And in terms of competency assessments, we would recommend that you go to an impartial body to just check that you are perhaps the right fit before you pay for a course of flight training. You need to be very heavily motivated, and that should be quite an obvious point. This can't be anybody else's dream. This needs to be your dream and your passion to begin. And it's important that you are resilient as well. With the current situation with COVID, it's quite evident that those people who are on flight training courses now might be slightly delayed in finding themselves a job at the end. But those are the people that need to be resilient, need to find some form of work to keep them going after their training. So always have a backup plan. Financial preparation is of course key. It is an expensive course and the prices vary depending on if you're looking at going down a modular or an integrated route, but you need to be prepared. That I would say falls as part of your research. And commitment of course is very important because you are signing up for at the very least a 2-year course. So you need to make sure you have that availability to complete. The last point on here is referred to as a medical. This is something I'm going to talk about quite specifically in another slide, but you need to ensure that you are at the correct medical fitness and standards to begin and finish your training. So I talked a bit earlier about some of the skills that we expect you to have by the end of your training and what we'll teach you for. So these are just a few of some of the ones that we would expect a commercial pilot to have. Things like multitasking should be quite evident. You'll be talking to air traffic control and flying an aircraft at the same time. Decisiveness and quick thinking, you need to be able to react to any situation that the aircraft puts you in, particularly ones that you might not be expecting, and you need to be confident with decisions that you make. So there's plenty of learning checklist items and emergency drills, lots of things you have to commit to your memory. Communication is of course key. You're going to be part of a multi-crew environment generally by the time you finish, so how you communicate with somebody else, including your instructor, is very important. Hand-eye coordination. You of course need to be able to look outside the aircraft and see what's going on. How do I make the aircraft move in the direction that I want using what I can see outside? You need to be disciplined. I won't lie, this is not an easy course at all. This does require a firm discipline. So you need a study schedule and you need to stick to it, particularly when you're doing your exams. Attention to detail is key. You need to be able to see again if the aircraft is performing the way that you want, and if it isn't, you need to be able to find what the problem is and correct it. But I've said here not to be a perfectionist. Sometimes if you look for too much detail and for things to be too perfect, you can actually kind of stress yourself out a bit, which isn't good for you or the aircraft. Problem solving, this keeps coming back again to the decisiveness, the attention to detail. Team player, again, works well with communication. You will be acting as a captain during your training, but you need to be able to work as part of a team. You will be a first officer. It's your first job if you work for an airline. And this term, situational awareness, again, very important. You need to know what's going on around you outside the aircraft as well as inside. So how can you go about getting some of these skills in advance? Well, most of them can be developed from extracurricular activities at your school or college, including sports are very good, we found. Work experience, if you can put yourself in an environment with a school or anywhere on an airport that specialises in perhaps working on these would be great. And even things like using a flight simulator or getting that motivation and preparation with the tools that are out there would be very, very good. Now, I mentioned the medical. So to break this down a little bit, you need to have a medical certificate in place issued by an authority that says you are safe to operate an aircraft with passengers. And we call that certificate a Class 1. A Class 1 is the minimum medical certificate required if you're looking to pursue a commercial training course. If, however, you would like to stop at the private pilot's licence to be qualified just to fly your friends and family without pay, you need to have what's called a Class 2 certificate at a minimum. Now, the Class 1 certificate is issued to you by a medical company, and there's several that you can find on the websites that the UK CAA have available. And the Class 1 certificate is only valid for 1 year at a time, so that's something to consider if you're doing a training course that's going to last longer than that period, which is most of them. Now, a common question that we get a lot from students is, can you be a pilot if you wear glasses? Yes, you can wear glasses and be a pilot. The medical standards of what you need to meet are available on the UK CAA's website if you want to have a look. So once you've decided this is something you'd like to do, you believe you might have some good starting skills, you've undergone perhaps a competency assessment with an individual body who say, yep, you're well fitted for this, you've gone to get your medical certificate, everything's good, what would we then expect from our students? Well, those of you on the theoretical phase, we would expect 100% attendance. So again, a lot more than a school might expect from you. You need to be a professional, so you need to wear the uniform that we provide you all the time that you're studying for these exams at the school. Full-time attendance is between Monday and Friday, 9 till 4. So again, you can see quite a big window there. At least 2 hours of computer training that you do yourself after you've attended the classroom. And of course, making sure that you're still studying even during the evenings and weekends. There's an awful lot to study for these 14 exams, so you do need to make sure you have a study plan in place. Once you've completed any progress tests at the school, then you may go and sit the exams, normally at the UK CAA, who are based at Gatwick. What about when you're doing your flight training, your practical flight training? Well, again, attendance is really important, so attend the school 5 days per week and you have a 9-hour day with your flight instructor. That doesn't mean 9 hours of flying, but that means you could be scheduled to fly anywhere within that 9-hour window. You need to be punctual. You are a pilot, of course, so you need to look and act professional. Use a bit of your own initiative when it comes to your self-studying, what perhaps you could do in advance of your next lesson, reading the necessary briefings, for example. And make sure that you do continue your studies when you're not flying. Once you've completed the exams, that doesn't mean you should throw away your study books and that's the end of it. You never have to refer to it again. There'll always be things that you'll need to refer back to, so it's good to keep your hand in those books. And lastly, again, trying to be proactive, take the opportunity to learn from other students. So try and backseat other people if they're going up on a lesson. Ask them, can you sit in the back? Can you make some notes quietly? Perhaps you've got the next lesson coming up as well, and they might ask you the same. If you're not very comfortable having people sitting in the back of your lesson, I'll be honest, this might not be the best career for you. It's a very team-based career, and that's a great way to continue your development. So, I hope that that's been of use to you to explain a little bit about how you study, what you train for, and what you get out of your studying. I have a video that I'd just like to show you towards the end, a little bit from the school, just to show you what it's like in a day-to-day environment. And if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to get in touch directly with FTA or your STEM representative at your school.
I've been on this course for about a month. I'm currently training towards my instrument rating, which will allow me to fly an aircraft without being able to see outside.
At the moment we're in ground school, so we begin at 8:30 in the classroom and we're going through every principle you'd ever need to know about an aircraft.
I chose FTA to train with because of its location in the UK. It's underneath challenging airspace with Gatwick, and the challenging weather makes it the best place in the world to train. The reason why I chose FTA is because they offered me a very attractive package, which includes the multi-engine piston rating, instrument rating, and the commercial pilot's license.
The aircraft are state-of-the-art. They're Diamond aircraft, Diamond 40 and 42, fitted with the G1000 glass cockpits, which is basically what you will find instrumentation-wise in a modern jetliner.
It's got it all really, it's quite well rounded.
And being on the coast, you get so many different climates coming in that you actually have to adapt your training to suit the different weather, and it makes you a more well-rounded pilot in the end.
We're all one big family, so the environment is very friendly, but professional at the same time.
There seems to be quite a close relationship with the instructors, which I suppose with a larger school you possibly wouldn't get.
If there's any issues or you need any help, you always know who to go to.
So it's not a pilot's factory here, it's more like a place where you can have fun, make friends.
They will know and keep up with where you are within your training, and they'll know what your strong points are and what your weaknesses are.
And we get to go out into Brighton and socialise outside of flight school, which is really important when studying for such an intensive course for 18 months.
And the next step is my commercial pilot's licence, which I will need before I can apply for a job.
Now I've just been offered a job with EasyJet starting next year.